Okay, so our volume now has these bounds and is ready to continue the journey of restoration. But before we do that, I think it's worth just going back to this cover that really has proven most interesting. So there's an awful lot of good value to be gotten out of this board. Obviously, we've gotten the medieval manuscript, which is fantastic. What I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do basically is to remove this strip of paper that has like a mirror image of the ink that was on the manuscript. So basically, obviously the manuscript was put in for no other reason than to cover these leather bumps, basically where the thongs are. That's the only purpose it served, was to cover that. It was just a scrap as far as the bookbinder was concerned. And then this paper was glued on, and obviously the glue being wet, soaked in, took some of the ink, and the ink transferred into the paper. So we have this mirror image, which means what I can do is actually trim this paper, and then we can actually do some work on a computer to take an image of this paper with this extra little bit here that's sort of like so. Flip it around, make it 50% translucent, superimpose it on a photo of this, and we'll actually get back to an image of the fragment that has a much stronger quality to the ink, which means we'll be able to hopefully stand a better chance of making out what all this paleography is in simple terms. So we're going to harvest that. So that's the first piece of extra sort of value the board will give us. I'm also going to try and keep as much of this paper as possible. Having nice, thick 450-year-old paper isn't to be sniffed at. That can be used for repairs, maybe to some of the text block, where we need to just sort of glue in some of the pages and do any sort of spot repairs that we need to. And then we have the leather. It's a shame we've only one board, because this leather really is gorgeous. If we had both boards, I'd be attempting a rebacking as opposed to doing a full restoration. But I just love this design here in the middle. It's very, very simple, but also just very beautiful, I think. So I'd love to be able to actually recycle this leather. And it so happens, so my wife and I went to downtown Manhattan a little bit earlier on today. And in the Strand bookstore, we came across this little beauty. So this, as you can see, has some absolutely gorgeous leather paneling here. And if you look, the colour's almost identical. It is, however, completely disbound. So both boards are separated. So this needs a rebacking. Now this particular book cost the princely sum of $45, which again just makes me weep in a sense. It shows just how little books are valued these days. But anyway, but this is a first edition of Dryden's most famous work, which was Fables, Ancient and Modern. Thomas Dryden actually died literally a few weeks after this was published, in the year 1700. This is an absolutely beautiful and seminal work. Dryden really was the first poet laureate. He influenced so many later sort of writers and poets throughout the rest of the 1700s and into the 1800s. So to actually have this as a complete work is actually very, very, very nice indeed. There's a little bit of misprinting going on there. It's always nice to see. But this is a very, very beautiful book. Normally I don't restore books unless they're at least 350 years old. This one's a little less than that. But to be honest, I think I'm going to make an exception. And I think what I'm going to do is use this leather. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to cut a great big strip. After I've soaked this leather off the board, I'm going to cut a great big strip off the middle here and do it in such a way that when we come to restore this text block, if we can pop that label off, which is no mean feat, but if we can get that off safely in one piece, what we can in theory do is cut this in such a way that this beautiful piece here will actually sit across these compartments here. This blemish will be covered by this label that will stick back. So we'll basically be using this strip of leather up the middle here to really nicely reback the book, and then using some of the sort of lessons and skills that I learned from rebacking the 1670 Hortus Pastorum. What I'm going to try and do is actually get some of that leather underneath here. And this is going to be a very, very gentle conservative restoration. But if I can sort of tease this leather back slowly, rethread with new cords, it'll obviously be sistering on the main binding to attach the boards, and then put that leather underneath, glue this back down, hopefully we'll preserve this beautiful leather paneling that we have here and just achieve a really nice but ultimately a very conservative restoration of this book. And that's all really possible because the colouring of this leather, and frankly even the damage it suffered, it speaks to authenticity. The colouring of this leather matches Dryden's book here very, very closely. So overall message, there's just heaps of value that's going to be gotten out of this cover. It's just amazing, just what it's going to yield us. So that's what we're going to do with the cover. So the next thing I'm going to do is gently trim off the mirror image here of the parchment. Okay, so we have the manuscript, the mirror image of the manuscript that was on the paste down. See that there? We've also got two good sections of contemporary paper that I've been able to save from the paste down. The cover itself is in a bath, so I'm now going to add the water. It's always a little bit risky just to see, I guess. We'll see how, I'm pretty hopeful this leather's going to hang together quite well. But you never can tell. There we go. So we're going to just pad that down. I might top that up a little bit. And then leave it to really soak into the cardboard critically, and therefore it'll get to the glue that's underneath the leather and just look how gorgeous this must have looked. Now it's wet and all the sins of all this bashing's been hidden. You can see just how gorgeous this leather must have been back in the day. This is worth saving. So we'll leave that to soak, and then we have the text block itself. So as mentioned before, the top couple, I think really, of gatherings were not really attached well at all here. They were loose. And in fact, this title page is sort of coming loose here as well. So what I'm going to do is use these pieces of paper to make some repairs around the edge here. And then I'm going to sew those gatherings around these new cords here. And then this text block will be set for lavishing a lot of glue onto the spine, which we'll let soak in overnight. Okay, so here's the top gathering of the book. As you can see, the top page itself is coming away. It's about halfway off there. So by definition, the back page is also kind of doing the same thing. This is 6 leaves, 3 sheets, in other words. So that's how this book's been put together in terms of gatherings. So if we basically count 3 sheets in, and my eyesight isn't what it was, I think I've only got 2 sheets there. 3 sheets in, we'll reveal the actual original thread that was used to sew the gathering in. You can also actually see there's some water staining at work there. So at some point this book's been gotten wet. But what I'm going to do is pull this old twine out. Like so. Yeah. 450-year-old hemp. Okay, so now that that's out, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a repair on this top section right here. And so this is one of the pieces of paste down that I harvested. This edge here is quite dark, quite stained. And overall, this is obviously the more exposed surface. That's quite a bit darker. This bit was sort of hidden away, sort of facing down onto the book, and it's quite a bit lighter. And the funny thing is, I can't fully explain myself why I think it looks better, but I think it looks better somehow to actually use this bit of paper with this sort of rougher, curved edge here, facing this way. And I wish I could explain why I feel it is that way, but I think it is. So what we're going to do is get ourselves some school glue. It's obviously my go-to for this kind of work. And I'm now just going to put this in its place like so. Ooh, it's going to be a little. See, if I've got a little bit more room, I might just, oops, slide her up a little bit. See, I don't want to cover the text. Okay, now it's as far as I'm going to get it. I think I'm actually tempted. I'm actually tempted to pull it tighter and then fold it back. I think I'm going to actually, that just looks a little bit too dark along this edge, and in any case the paper I think is just slightly bigger than it needs to be. So I'm actually going to just fold it along here and then actually trim that edge in a moment. Okay, so now we have a good solid edge here through which we can safely pass a needle, and then we'll sew this gathering back in. The next gathering just out of shot here. The next gathering is also pretty weakly attached. I think for the next gathering that I'm looking at here, there's some attachment. So I think what I'm probably going to do is actually sew it in a second time in situ. I'm not going to separate it out. And the pages all seem well attached. So I'm going to sort of put an extra set of loops in around these cords for the second one. And then I'll sew that guy in. And then the text block will basically be ready for gluing. In the meantime, let's see how our leather's doing. I'm going to lift this text block completely out of the way here for a second, as I will the manuscript, just in case I get any water sloshing around, which would not be good. Okay, now let's see if this leather's in the mood to start to come away here. Oh yeah, that's coming away nicely. This is, and it's holding together well. That's the really important thing. Oh yeah, just look at this. So I'm going to use maximum surface area, minimum force, and just pull. Just let gravity do the work. Pull the leather off in one gentle, slow, patient motion. There we go. Absolutely gorgeous. This leather will have a new life. Okay, so to wrap up this segment, just before I sew this guy back in, which I'll do momentarily. So we have this leather panel. It looks I have to say this looks absolutely gorgeous. Really pleased with the way that's come out. But this board is the gift that keeps on giving, because not only that, after I'd soaked it, I was able to save the rest of the paste down paper, which is just amazing to me. This is paper that's, 440 and odd years old. And the whole thing just came off smoothly in one piece. So I'm just leaving it there to continue to sort of dry out there. So that can be reused, that can be used for future repairs. And unbelievably, the board survived too. And not only did it survive, but I was able to apply some pressure to it to actually flatten down, I think it's this one here actually, flatten down the damaged corner. It hasn't warped and become sort of a great big sort of spongy mess. It stayed together as a board. So, beautiful. Which is wonderful, because the sheer size of this board means in the future when I get another folio from the 15 or 1600s, it probably won't be as big as this. I'll be able, and if it's missing a board, I'll be able to trim this one to size and use it as part of the restoration. So just, I'm just, books were made well in the 1500s, I have to say. Ever since then, it's just, things have gone downhill slowly as the hundreds of years have gone by. But I have a lot of respect for the craftsmanship that I've learned today here. So they knew how to do books back then. Okay, so we have some glue here ready to go. The top two gatherings have now been sewn in. So that's how the book looks there. If I just tilt it over, you can see the title page right there. So now in a position to do the painting and decorating, as it were, and just really start slathering on good old Elmer's glue. The really good thing here is, judging by how clean this spine is, I don't think the leather of the previous binding was ever actually glued directly onto the spine, which again is another sign that this binding that we had here was original. This wasn't a 17th century, sorry, forgive me, an 18th century redo, because that almost certainly would have, there'd be fragments of leather and dark staining and so on, very visible here on the spine, and that wasn't the case. So I think that beautiful sort of calf leather cover we saw there was a bit ahead of its time, to be honest. You know, that would have been much more normal for France 100 years later, 200 years later, but I think that was a really fine early calf leather binding. So I'm just going to really get this glue on, get it soaking down between the gatherings, also get it going into this rope. We really want it to sort of set these fibres. One reason this is going to be important is eventually I'm going to unwind these fibres into their constituent strands. You know, each cord here has, you know, 3 sort of smaller cords twined together. Normally, when I rebuild a text block, I do a plait as opposed to a twist in the rope, but feeling a bit lazy here. I'm leaving the twist as is, the way the rope was made. But that leaves the risk, of course, that the thing could start to unwind. So it's important to get glue sort of soaked into the rope now and hardened and dried before we start down that road. And also I get it into the thong there, the whole thing basically, all of it. So it all just becomes one sort of glue-based solid. It should be very resilient, provided nobody gets the book wet, of course. Then it'll just become a school project, which won't be very good. There we go. Very therapeutic doing this. These threads tend to be a bit mischievous. Just get them back where they need to be. A bit more glue goes in the pot. Wanting to work the glue kind of underneath those leather thongs there. Because it's the glue that's going to give the strength. In a sense, all the sewing and everything else is just there temporarily. But it's this glue that really is going to ultimately hold this text block together. So it's important to get it everywhere. It's really good if we can get it to, you know, soak in several millimeters down between the gatherings. There we go. Come on, down you go. Should probably trim these with scissors a bit more than I did, but whatever. Eventually they'll surrender and start to just lay down where I want them to. I'm actually going to do 2 rounds of this. This first round just glue straight on, as you can see. And then eventually I'm going to put a second sheet of fabric on. And that fabric I'm then going to soak with glue again. And that'll be really what sets this text block well in place. There we go. I use school glue because frankly, if it's good enough for a 6-year-old, the chances are it's pretty close to how glue used to be 500 years ago. Doesn't smell, doesn't leave a residue. Obviously, if the book ever gets wet, it's toast, but unless and until that happens, this will do its job very, very nicely. There we go. That's what we want. It's starting just to become one sort of gluey surface here. So it's the glue that holds the text block together. It's this rope that holds the boards to the text block. There we go. That's just about it for a first go over. I think that's fine. Make sure that thread lays down flat. Good. All right. So we're going to leave this to dry. Then we'll do the whole thing again in a few hours with a layer of fabric. Leave that to dry overnight. And then we'll be in a position to think about attaching the new boards.